Now we're in the space whereby digital entertainment has really penetrated our society. And those who come from this country, Kenya, we are among the highest in terms of percentage of population, in terms of digital penetration, accessibility to internet, mobile phone ownership, or even accessibility to the younger generation, even a generation as a whole. And I don't think we have really reflected deeply how that has affected us in terms of also our discipleship. What does that mean in terms of now discipling someone whose attention is being competed and called for from different places? How do you disciple now a generation that lives in a pornified culture? Meaning the sexual content that is easily accessible on the smartphones and the multiple screens that are available now to the younger generation and to this generation as a whole. How do you respond to that? One of my contention is the fact that sexuality, gender, marriage is actually, I think, in my opinion, a watershed issue
already. Yeah, it's
for this generation.
Before it used to be black and white.
Yes.
Yeah.
Now, I think this is an issue almost calling in for us to make what you would almost call a creed. Because we are in a moment where there's such varied opinions around sexuality, around marriage, around gender, in the wider culture, the dominant culture, and the Christian on campus, or even say the church at large, would need now to come together and make a creed. Where do we stand on these issues? What is God's perspective on these issues? And we cannot be shallow, because the society and our culture are asking serious issues. And therefore it will call for us to have deep reflections. And of course, we have all the wealth and the wisdom from the scriptures. But the issues of sexuality, I think, are a watershed moment for us. We must sit down, call the best of our theologians, reflect on this, and even issue out a statement that the students can live by and hold on to, because the waves and the currents are very, very strong.
Yeah. And you're right in saying that, because I read in a research, it's called the Africa Youth Research. I think I mentioned it to you when I sent you the questions. Says that they did a research amongst Christians, committed Christians and nominal Christians. Not anyone who is not in the Christian circle.
Yeah.
And they described the committed Christians as one who by themselves reads the Bible and prays once a week, at least once a week. And the nominal Christian would be one who is outside that circle, maybe one who just identifies by going to church on a Sunday morning. They say there's only a 10% difference in terms of sexual experience by the time these people are 21. So the nominal Christians will be having maybe a 60%, and the committed ones 50% sexual experience. You know, for every one by 21 they have had a sexual experience. And now you're talking about it being watershed, and we would even talk about an issue like LGBT, which I know it's another whole big issue altogether. But would you want to begin by helping us, I wanted to say appreciate, but making comments in regard to the net effect of sexual sin in a Christian community, like in the CU, where we have both the leaders and the non-leaders, in that miry clay of sexual sin.
I think the best reference I can link this to is the incidents where Balak invites Balaam to curse Israel in Numbers chapter 24, 25. And the conversation that carries on between Balak and Balaam. And all of us, I think, know that story where the donkey spoke. but I think there's an underlying lesson therein that can be brought back for our time in this culture. At the very end, Balaam seems to have brought in a deception through sexual immorality, where Israel was a blessed people. He seduced them through sexual immorality. And the scriptures do make reference where God says, you know, this was indeed idolatry. The ultimate goal there was actually a departure from God. And in my opinion, is that even though we think that this could be a sexual purity issue, it is actually not just a sexual purity issue. We cannot talk about sexual purity apart from the gospel. Because one of the key fundamental truths of the gospel is that indeed Christ has delivered us and given us victory over sin. So victory over sin and understanding of God's thinking and view about human sexuality is indeed at stake. And when you think about it, what that translates to is the fact that those now in the wider culture do not see any difference between being a believer and being an unbeliever. And that kind of really affects the power of our witness or the effectiveness of our witness. And not only that, but also now that means we also live in a sense of a deception in terms of our own relationship with God. And even though the culture plays down sexual purity, I do not think the scriptures do. There are several instances where sexual immorality in specific is mentioned, that those who are sexually immoral will not inherit the kingdom of God. So what is at stake actually is eternity. At the end of the day, it's actually eternity. Because we cannot continue living in sexual immorality and at the same time do claim to belong to the Lord. And this is a hard conversation, especially because the wider culture plays the whole issue of sexual immorality back to an issue of choice to the individual, and do not regard or think it in terms of how God thinks about it as a sin issue and as idolatry that is a departure from allegiance to Him. So the way a Christian looks at sexual immorality is totally different from the way a non-Christian or the wider culture looks at sexual immorality. To them, it's something that, they talk about it so casually. For us, it is not casual. For us, it is actually a betrayal of the faith and the relationship that we have with God. Yeah.
I sense a gap then in our discipleship, so that when we are discipling, when the Christian community is engaged in discipleship, we don't talk of the bigger issue. You know, we are not looking at it as idolatry, as a matter of eternity, as a matter of allegiance to God, so that it's not just a single act of sin, but it's an indicator of departure from God. Do you sense that there is something bigger we need to do to close that gap in our discipleship as far as sexuality and marriage and purity is concerned?
I think so. I think in every generation there arises an issue that becomes contentious. And the believers in that generation must make it clear, both in their profession and in their practice. And I want to believe that, like I said, for our generation, sexual purity, our understanding of human sexuality, gender, and even our understanding and value for marriage needs to be restated. And therefore, any student ministry in our time and age must place a high premium in giving a biblical worldview and making the discipleship of the students being raised in this time and age to have a substantial address of that area and those topics exhaustively, because those questions will continue coming up as they are growing. And therefore, they'll need to have a philosophical response that they can actually, and a way to explain their convictions to their own friends, in terms of when they are asked, love is love, by all the campaigns by the LGBTQ activists. How will a student respond to that theologically, that love is love? Then you also come to the issue of personal struggle. I may be able to win the battle mentally, but how is my life being lived out? Am I personally, as a Christian, on campus, kind of having true victory over sin that becomes a witness to my classmates and to my friends? So we find the need not only for us to develop more, okay, let me try to actually kind of number them. Number one would be, we need a creed. We need a creed all of us can be going back to, and draw wealth in terms of clarity on these issues. But secondly, we will need now discipleship resources paying attention to the issue. Meaning, we are having much more attention and percentage of the involvement and engagement with the students around these issues of marriage. And thirdly, is the follow-up in terms of life on life, that the leaders at the Christian Union level are themselves living in victory in this issue, so that what we profess and how we are living becomes a witness to the students that now we are with. We cannot again continue making the simplistic do's and don'ts that don't go beneath the surface of asking, so why are we made like this? So is love love? What does it mean that now I am making a personal choice? Because we need to answer all those philosophical questions being fronted by the culture. How the culture defines freedom. Because they're talking about sexual revolution sells us the deception of freedom. That the fact that I'm able to choose who I love, who I sleep with, that is freedom. Now we need to engage with that intellectually with them, but also we also need to live it out so that we have a life that speaks loudly even more than how we would explain it.
And the issue of LGBT, and there are many more letters that they keep adding them. Yeah, they have a community. There is a rainbow community. Yeah. And I think it's special. And with that, because I've not had a communicator
people seem to, not come out in that regard and say, especially among Christians, because I think we are talking to the Christian community. But do sense a danger in this kind of an identity that we are LGBT community, but Christians don't shun us away, don't lock the door on us. This is who we are. As something different from other expressions of sexual sin or freedom.
You can say that again. I think the fact that the ideology around the sexuality has been picked and packaged different from all other, like you're saying, there's no other sin that people identify with. Nobody says I am thief. I am a thief. You see the word I am gay, not I am a gay. I am gay brings in an identity that is totally different from something that you would almost call something you do, but something you are. Yeah. Which is a philosophical framing. So in my opinion is to say that because this is well organized, this poses a great danger, and it calls for us also, we may not maybe organize ourselves like they have on a single issue, but we need to be clear on the issue they are raising, tying it to the gospel. Because for us, the foundation on which our faith is on is the gospel of our Lord Jesus Christ, that speaks to whatever issue the culture of the day will contend with. And therefore, if we go back there and lay a firm foundation, And then we are able to make a statement from the best amongst us in terms of those who have gone for theological training. We can have hope in giving a reason that can respond to them. And I think, like you're saying, we will need very specific seminars, trainings that will need to be done again and again, making a good apologetic defense of our faith towards the issue of our own sexuality. Yeah, the lack of which I think will make the student on campus not have a weak kind of approach, or even be drowned by all the arguments coming in from the other end. And if they are not able to really battle it up mentally, they kind of start to crumble on what they believe, because they're not able to see the framework on which they stand on. So we need to help them translate the gospel to the issue. How does the gospel speak to this issue? Yeah.
So probably just a follow-up the same. So how has that affected the handling of frustration, disappointment, and the entire mental health movement, especially that we're experiencing, this boom of mental health issues in the church, especially in the church? How has that kind of deception come and manifested itself? Is there any relationship? Can there be a way to turn back to the truth that would probably help sort even mental health issues? Is there a correlation that you can point out there? Is there anything there?
That's a very serious question. I'm not worthy to answer it. If you ask me, and now if you start looking at the effects that now we are experiencing amongst young adults, number one, during that period of time in terms of success, there was a low view of marriage, because everyone was looking for this imagined path of success. And so sexuality, marriage was downplayed in terms of it, and the entire relationships. So that had a major effect. Number two was the fact that because we lived on this high expectation that we are going to become the heads and not the tails, and we are going to be the first and not the last, and that if things in life are going to be there, it has up to me. When we realized we are not totally in control of all aspects of life, when we started now realizing that indeed we are actually not the heads at all times, we are having people on top of us, when some of those students couldn't secure jobs after staying out of campus for a few years, when other factors that were not anticipated on their path of success, like sickness, they viewed sickness as an interruption towards that path of material prosperity. Then they completely felt lost. And I am persuaded that contributes to a number of now the mental health issues we are experiencing. Because then it became almost illusionary that the future was promised doesn't really exist. And the way I thought and I had planned my life to play out, or the way I was told my life will play out, and then I realized that I am the last one amongst my peers to get married. I am the last one amongst my peers to get an opportunity in a blue chip company. I started questioning whether my relationship with God is right, because the preacher connected your relationship with God with your material prosperity. So I started now having a conflict of faith, because I wasn't so sure whether there's something I haven't done right with God, which in itself now leads to serious mental illness. And now that we're talking about mental illness, I would say the second, or maybe the first thing that actually contributes to that is actually porn. The damage pornography does to the brain is a conversation we will need to have as a generation. You cannot consume all those images into your mind day in, day out. You cannot expose yourself to such levels of sexual immorality and perversion and have a sober mind. I mean, there's now lots of research coming up and now kind of being available that the way that porn damages the mind is not like any other addiction before. Because all other addictions before, you wanted some more. Porn wants some more different, not some more of the same. You see, when you're addicted to cocaine, you want more cocaine. When you're addicted to porn,
You want more
different, not like what you watched. So you're going towards violence. Violent porn. You're going to different kinds of expression of perversions. Now, those perversions, they destroy the brain because it gives you overwhelming shame and guilt that you cannot handle. And that, I think, also contributes greatly to the entire mental health of the rising generation.
The Fellowship of Christian Unions, reaching students, changing nations.